GMO labeling. Okay, requires foods with GMOs to be labeled. It's got GMO in it. Does not allow any product with GMO to be labeled natural. It exempts from the labeling anything that's certified organic, even if it does contain GMOs. And it exempts a bunch of other exemptions. I could give a whole lecture on the exemptions in this thing. It's a massive part of the law, but I'll touch on that in a minute. So their argument is that GMOs are, oh, well, let me just say, just on a guess, who do you think's putting all the money into this initiative? The organic, certified organic companies. So GMOs are dangerous, is the basic argument. GMOs are bad. People shouldn't be eating them. And people want labels so they'll know and be able to avoid it if they so desire. And much of the rest of the developed world does have this requirement already, so why don't we join the party? The no arguments is we've been using genetically modified GMOs in food for 20 years with FDA continuous testing and approval during that time. It would ban thousands of products only in California unless they were relabeled. It has so many wacky exemptions, you can't believe it. So, like dairy products have to be labeled, but so second order dairy products have to be labeled, but like milk doesn't. Even if you use the milk to make cheese, the cheese has to be labeled, but the milk doesn't. There's a whole bunch of stuff like that. Yeah.
Why would that be? Why would this be written that way then?
I honestly can't say, not having been a part of it, but they carved out lots of exemptions. So like GMO, if a restaurant buys food that has GMO in it, they're not required to tell customers. So Taco Bell and Burger King don't have to label their stuff. But if it's packaged, so I'm trying to think, like if you, if you buy any of those same foods, so if you buy Taco Bell brand salsa or taco shells in the store, it has to be labeled, but not if they serve it in Taco Bell. So there's a lot of stuff like that. I think a lot of it was just trying to make things simpler and more doable, because having restaurants do this would be even more of a nightmare. But the fact is, if, as the No campaign says, look, if this was really about consumer information, you wouldn't have a lot of exemptions, because the whole point would be so that consumers always know whether there's GMO in their food. If half the time they do and half the time they don't, well, it's really just about some people having to label their food GMO and other people not having to label their food GMO. And then the last thing is this will raise food costs. I mean, there's the direct costs of labeling. There's the cost of we have to have a whole new enforcement system. So now the existing regulators in California have to start regulating a whole new thing, which is making sure that every food product sold in California has a label if it needs to. And third, lawsuits. I mean, you can imagine a labeling requirement is like the most fertile ground for lawsuits you can imagine. And so there'll be a lot of costs with that, yeah.
How many other states?
No states in the U.S. do this.
So
lots of other countries do it. They want California to lead the nation.
Well, California is leading so many things.
We're the leader on everything. So, okay, without exception, all the major health studies on GMOs say we can't find any evidence of any problems anywhere. You can find studies that say there are problems with GMOs, but they are one-shot, non-replicated, kind of marginal studies. So the International Council for Science, American Medical Association, World Health Organization, all have done huge reports saying we've looked at everything we can possibly look at, we've reviewed every study, and we can't find any evidence that GMOs are a problem. So the idea that we've really got to deal with this problem just it doesn't hold up, at least in science circles. Politics, of course, is not science. The exemptions show that it's really not about consumer information. I think it's all really fundamentally about trying to give some participants in the food market an advantage over other participants in the food market. And this is, to me, the killer. The FDA has for years said, companies, think about this. years ago, companies went to the FDA and said, hey, we want to put a label on our food that says we have no GMO in it, because there are some customers out who want that. And doesn't that make sense? If people really care about GMO, isn't the right way to allow companies who don't have GMO to market to those people directly and say, hey, here's your GMO-free products? And the FDA said no, no, no to that. And they also say no, no, no to labeling that it has GMO. Why do they say that? Because they can find no scientifically valid process by which you can determine whether a food has GMO in it or not. So they are saying these labels are unprovable. And the lawyers are like, sweet, because nothing's better than something unprovable. Then it's just who makes the better argument in front of the judge, because there's no objective evidence to decide that case. So basically, the proponents of this initiative are saying California's food regulators are much smarter than the FDA. They can figure out criteria for a label that'll scientifically valid, and it'll work. I don't believe them. Yes.
In a lot of these propositions, you pointed out the flaws in how they're written. So is it a good strategy just to say no, go back and do it right?
Well, that's usually what happens when we vote no.
I know what's in food, and I don't
Yeah.
rely on the FDA.
Right. Right. My wife and I have been around on this. Yeah, she's the same way. But to me, this is the killer. Is the FDA says, look, if we could come up with a process to determine it, we'd be. They clearly like labeling requirements in general. That's why we have so many labeling requirements on food already. But they're just saying, you know, the law says it has to be a scientifically verifiable process. You can determine how many calories are in a food. You can determine how much iron and all these, trans fats. We can measure trans fats. And we cannot measure GMOs. It all requires on words. So one of the things the No campaign points out is foreign suppliers of food products, not just processed food, but the stuff that goes into food. So dried milk products and stuff that gets shipped in giant containers to get used in making all kinds of food, grains, all of these things. All they have to do is say, yeah, there's no GMO in here, and it meets the law. So it's just their word. But U.S. producers have the burden of proof to prove. So what do you think is going to happen to the balance of trade for food products when that goes into effect in California? So it has a lot of consequences.